How do I become a New York Times best-selling author? If that isn't the golden question, my friend, I don't know what is. If you like riddles, you're gonna like what I have to say, because figuring out how to get a placement on the New York Times bestseller list is such a mind game that it's almost, there's only speculation, there are only educated guesses, there are only theories. No one truly knows how to get their book directly onto the New York Times bestseller list, because they keep such a tight lid on their process, on their algorithm, whatever their process is. It's almost impossible to crack unless you are working for them or in their business in some way or another. Let's say that you do get on the bestseller list. One thing that's important to know is that if you are ranked in the top 10, you are automatically a bestseller. However, there are different lists that the Times ranks books on. So if you're within the top 10 of any of those lists, you're a bestseller. Obviously, if you hit number 1 on one of those lists, you're a number 1 bestseller. The New York Times pulls a lot of small bits of data from a lot of small pools of sources. And I'm going to dive deep into that in a second. But right now, I kind of want to give you more of an overview of how the list operates from a higher level. The bestseller list is essentially a curated list of titles that editors get together in a room and put together to present to whoever their higher up is for them to choose who a bestseller is. So it is and it isn't really truly a bestseller list. If anything, you can almost imagine it as a list that's been through a screening process and is given to an administrator for easier choosing, if that kind of helps you think about it in a better way. And the list tends to focus more on perennial bestsellers, meaning those who hold their spot on the list week after week after week. And what they define as a perennial bestseller means that they're selling 5,000 to 10,000 copies a week. If you make those sales on the first week, that's not a surprise. Second week, still not really a surprise. Third week, if you can kind of hold your placement with those sales up to and through week 3, that is more or less going to guarantee you a good shot at making the list. Doesn't mean that you will, but it means you have a higher chance of doing that because you've kind of made it over that hump, if that makes sense. So the list, the bestseller list, is comprised of 11 weekly and 7 monthly lists that cover paperbacks, that cover audiobooks, ebooks, hardcovers, there's combinations, there's a separate list for children, business titles. So both nonfiction and fiction lists are going to have the same subcategories that are hardcover, paperback, and combination, which is print and ebook. And then when we're talking about the monthly lists, this is going to be audio fiction, audio nonfiction, business, graphic books, mass market, middle grade paperback, and young adult paperback. The list that you choose, you have to be so educated about it because for whatever reason, the Times is very, very specific about this, and they want to see that you're choosing a list that is most appropriate for your book. What that criteria is, I have no idea. I don't think anyone's really been able to figure that out. So even choosing the wrong list, and you don't know which one is the wrong list, will automatically disqualify you from having a good shot on the New York Times bestseller list. So that's kind of an overview of what the list is, sort of how it works, what it really is. When we're getting into the theories and the speculations around what it takes to make it onto that list, we've got a lot to pull from. It seems that certain retailers count more than other retailers. So the Times has an undisclosed group of retailers around the country that report all of their sales, and they use an assortment of code names for the book, for the author, for the stores, to kind of like organize all of that information whatever way they do. And they sample different stores across the country and weigh the book sales based on where they're purchased from. So for example, a hardcover book bought on Amazon is going to count differently than a hardcover book bought at your local indie bookstore. I don't know why. That's part of the mystery. And the Times heavily considers indie bookstores because they believe that those who shop at those stores are more invested readers or more hardcore readers or more serious readers. Wherever the indie bookstores are, that is, I think it seems that's what the Times focuses more on. There is speculation around what other sources the Times pulls from to determine how well a book is doing. Some of these include Amazon, ReaderLink, which is a distributor for big box stores like Target or Walmart, individually reporting stores like indie bookstores, and BookScan, which is a very popular database that like tracks sales of all different kinds of books. What's interesting is that I don't think the Times takes particularly well to ebooks, partly because I don't think they want Amazon's like ebook version, which I think is Kindle. They don't want their ebook version competing with the Times' ebook version, which I think is like, I don't know. And from what I understand, based on the research that I've done, is that the Times doesn't necessarily pull hard data from Amazon, but it seems like they kind of keep an eye on Amazon just to see how well certain books are performing. So it seems like they use it more as a gauge rather than as like a direct source. And when we're talking about all of the sales that are needed to have a shot on the bestseller list, meaning 5,000 to 10,000 sales a week, that means that you cannot invest in bulk buys. And bulk buys are exactly what they sound like. These are like large quantities of data purchased at a singular time. This could be for a book group. This could be for speaking events. This could be for corporate wellness programs or whatever the case may be. Bulk orders don't count because they're going to flag that in all of the data reporting software as a bulk buy because they're going to know that people are trying to game the system, which is a little bit ironic in my mind, seeing how many flips and hurdles you have to do to get on their list. So it seems that they prefer smaller, more frequent distributed purchases. So maybe someone buys a book off Amazon, and then that same person buys 2 books from Barnes & Noble, and then that same person buys 3 books from their bookstore down the road. That's going to count more than it would be, purchasing 500 books from one third-party vendor. The other thing too is, obviously, if you have a direct connection with the Wall Street Journal, whether you've worked there or you were a previous author of theirs, your book is going to stay on the New York Times bestseller list much longer and is going to be considered more heavily to be put on the bestseller list in the first place. Having all that being said, with how they possibly approach the list and all the things that they most likely probably maybe do, there have been a few different successful marketing tactics that other authors have tried and have seen success with. That success mainly being classified as correlated and not caused, if that makes sense. So their marketing tactics didn't work because they made it on the New York Times list. They most likely worked because they did it and ended up getting on the New York Times bestseller list. One thing that really, really helps, and a lot of people will do massive PR campaigns around their book if they're trying to go for a New York Times bestselling book, it's really, really important that you get really top-notch media placements because New York City loves New York City. And if all of your media placements happen to be in New York City, they're going to notice that. So some things that authors have specifically done are hire 2 high-end book publicists to get on as many television interviews as possible, purchasing full-page ads in national and local papers across the country, obviously having an established platform, being a frequent podcast guest, and quarterly speaking engagements, and having media and press and eyes on that. I think I read about one author who literally paid people to pay in cash for their book at a lot of different stores within a certain area. I don't know, it was something crazy like that. People have also run advertising in Times Square in New York City. People have paid the fee for the book publisher to have their book placed on the front tables at Barnes & Noble right when you walk in. It really, really helps if you get a traditional publishing deal from a New York Times publisher, which are the top 5, the big 5. That's known as Penguin Random House, Simon & Schuster, Hachette, HarperCollins, and Macmillan. If you're published out of one of those, you have a really, really good shot. And you'll want to do a pre-order campaign as well, which can easily take around 6 to 8 months to do. And this takes place in advance of your publication. So essentially what you're doing is you're running up sales before your book is even out. The race is on to generate as many book sales as possible before that week closes, because any bestseller campaign typically is going to take place over a week. I think the only exception is Amazon, because Amazon updates hourly. The point of doing a pre-order campaign is that you've already gotten a leg up. It's kind of like if you're running a race, instead of starting at the starting line with everyone else, you're starting like halfway up, so that by the time the race goes live, boom, you're easy to cross that finish line with a lot more success than everyone else behind you who didn't have pre-orders. So that is how you do your best to earn a place on the New York Times bestseller list. If you don't have the time, what you can do, if you certainly have the money, is buy your way onto the list. And this can very, very, very easily cost six figures, as much as $250,000, $250,000. If you have that kind of money, my friend, you'll have a good shot at making the list. With all of that being said, why do people want to make it on the New York Times bestseller list? And that might be a bit of a silly question, but a lot of people want it for the name, people want it for the connections, people want it for the status, for the prestige that comes along with being called a New York Times bestseller, and very much so a #1 New York Times bestseller. You can do a whole lot. You can have your life made, it seems, by calling yourself a New York Times bestselling author. However, one interesting thing to note is that just because you are published through a top publisher, like the Big Five, Penguin Random House, Hachette, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, and Macmillan, that doesn't necessarily mean that your book is going to sell. This campaign, if you're going to make it on the list, is going to take so much time, planning, preparation, and education, and certainly educated guesses, because there is no certain way to make it on the list. It seems they kind of have their own rhythm, they have their own beat, which is something to keep in mind if that is a goal of yours. Anyway, that's pretty much the list. There's no right way. I don't even know how to explain it. There's just certainly a lot to consider if you're going to make that your goal. So that is how the New York Times more or less operates and how to get your book on their bestseller list. I hope you found this helpful. If you did, feel free to reach out to me. Let me know your goals, how I can support you. Check me out on Instagram, and I'll see you next time. Bye.